Welcome to another episode of Cadence Fishing TV. I'm fishing today at the wonderful Packington fishery, which is between Birmingham and Coventry. It's a venue that I've fished for years. In fact, I used to fish it as a kid when it was just a series of big gravel pits. And this lake, Molan's, was the biggest gravel pit here. Anyway, I think it was probably 20-25 years ago, they made it into this wonderful commercial fishery. And I really like it because it's beautifully established. You can see the vegetation around the lakes themselves are absolutely beautiful. And even though this is early spring, it really feels nice to be out and the sun's shining, so that's an even better bonus. Yeah, so the lake I'm fishing today is Molan's, and this is peg 44. And the sort of main aim of the video today was an inspiration from John Birchall, the fishery manager. I spoke to John last week and he told me that they were catching a lot of really big F1s in the matches. Typically they were catching them in the last hour or two of the match. Obviously the water's still cold, the fish are still waking up after the winter period, but last week there was a couple of really big weights, up to almost 200 pounds of these fantastic F1s. So I thought I'd give it a go. F1 fishing isn't really a forte of mine. I have done it a bit in the past, and obviously now it's the end of the river season. I'm looking to get out fishing and I really thought I'd give it a go. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge for me, to be honest, but I've really picked John's brains and some of the other lads that fish here, so I think I'm armed with some good information. And the first thing I'm going to do is plumb up. Okay, well that's quite a substantial plummet, and one thing I do know from my experience on fishing commercials is plumbing up is really, really important. Now, John's explained to me that they've been catching the big F1s quite close into the margins. And I'm going to fish two different lines, and I'm going to very, very carefully plumb up the depth. Now, as you can see there, I'm just about dead depth. And that's just over 4 foot there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off fishing there, and then I've got another rig to fish slightly closer into the margins as the session progresses. And as I move my plummet up the slope now, you can see how it's shallowing up. So I'm basically fishing on a slope. And that's about as close as I'm going to fish, quite close into those reeds. Now it might not work today, the fish might be a bit further out in the deeper water, but that's my thinking. So I'm going to start off feeding one line there in around about 4 foot of water, and obviously I'm trying to use a marker on the far bank and a branch on that tree just to identify exactly where it is, so I know exactly what the depth is there. Sometimes when I'm plumbing up like this with different lines I forget, so it's really important just to take the time just to work out exactly where you're going to be fishing. And then round to my left I'm going to repeat the same process. So I've got a tree on the far bank there that I'm lining up with, and that there is exactly the same depth. So what's that's giving me is it's giving me two lines that I'm going to be fishing at the same depth, so I'm not going to need to adjust my float or anything when I'm switching between the two lines, and I'll explain about why I'm fishing two lines in a bit. And then again, if I move in towards the bank, you can see that the lake is shallowing up. And in this case, that's about as far as I'm going to fish to the bank there. So that's about a good foot shallower. And what I've done, I've taken the time to mark those depths on my pole, and I'll just show you that. So on this top kit, I've already pre-marked this, that's 4 foot, and that's 3 foot. And where I'm starting off is slightly over 4 foot. And basically, I'm going to be fishing within that range today. So within 3 foot and just over 4 foot. So I hope that makes sense. But I'm just trying to make it as clear as I can. I've marked the same marks on my 3 different top kits. So I know if I switch between rigs, I can reference the same depth. Obviously, it doesn't mean I'm always going to fish that depth. I might decide to fish a bit over depth, a bit shallower, just depending on how the fish respond. Okay, so because it's a short session today, I'm really going to limit myself just to those 2 main lines. I'm only using just over 5 meters of pole, and the way I'm going to feed it is I'm going to use a quite a big pole mounted pot like that. I'm going to just fish maggots today, and I'm going to feed via the cup, and I'm just going to rotate between those two different lines. So let's get started. John did tell me that, as in the matches, can be a bit of a slow start. I'm really excited to see, because I do like catching big F1s, and the F1s here at Packington are quite famous really, because, well, I know they've caught them in matches up to £7, which is really big for an F1. So there we go, there's a pot of maggots. I've actually put a bit of milled pellet in with my maggots, which I'll explain later as well. My thinking there is I just want to try and attract some fish into the swim. John has said to start with, there you go, he's bang on the money, that I'd probably catch a few small fish. I bumped that one. And John's advice to me was just keep feeding. So we're not here to catch the silverfish today, we're trying to catch the bigger F1s. And I think I had a single maggot on to start with, so I'm going to try a double red maggot. And this time I'm going to feed the swim to my left in the same way. So it's kind of intriguing for me, because obviously if I was fishing a natural venue most of the time, I'd be loose feeding. I'd probably be loose feeding by hand at this range, or a little catapult. But when you're fishing for F1s, it's often really critical to be very, very accurate with your feed. So that's the way I'm going to feed it today, just through a pole pot. Obviously I can vary the amount I'm feeding by how much I'm putting in the pole pot, and also the frequency that I'm feeding. Even though the sun's out, it was a very cold morning this morning. It was quite a heavy frost, and we decided to wait until the afternoon to start fishing. So hopefully the water started to warm up, and you can actually see a few nice carp cruising out around, obviously enjoying the sun on their back. So that's good to see. Well, I've had about 10 roach and rudd, and this is my first F1, and it looks like a decent fish. I took it from my left hand swim, and I just kept feeding, resting the line, and there we go, that's the first one. So that's a good sign. A little bit earlier than really we were expecting to catch one. So I'll just unhook him and hold him up for you. I had that one on a single red maggot, and I was fishing pretty much dead depth. What was interesting was I wasn't getting any bites off any small roach or rudd anymore, so perhaps that means the F1s have moved in. I hope so anyway. That's a lovely F1. Not a monster, but really good. That's got to be, I don't know, well over a pound, probably a pound and a half. Hopefully we'll get some more. So the way I think I'll play it is I'll top up that swim where I just caught that fish with another half a pot of maggots. Because I don't want to go mad. Obviously if the fish have just arrived, I want to kind of nurture them a bit. I'll give them there. And I'll give this right hand swim a go. I've just taken one on my right hand swim. It wasn't straight away, it was probably about 5 or 10 minutes after that first one, so this one feels a bit better. I'll just try and get him up. Whoa. There we go. Got him. He's actually foul hooked, that one. He's given me a bit of grief to get out. I foul hooked him in the tail. Anyway, it shows that there's some fish moving onto those lines, just like John had told me. It's a curious thing, isn't it? Maybe the water temperature just increases a bit, or they just become accustomed to feeding later on in the day. That's a real chunky one, that one. That's got to be over 2, that one. I think they're beautiful fish, the F1s. And that one looks more like a crucian to me. And obviously F1s are a cross between a common carp and a crucian carp. And they provide great sport because they do tend to feed all year round. Right, let's give it another go. So the reason I'm feeding 2 lines like this is I can swap between them and hopefully not plunder one line too much. Certainly to start with. Obviously if I start catching really well on one line, then I'll keep fishing that line. And I'm sticking with the pole pots to feed. So I'm just going to feed that line where I caught that fish and try the other line. Maybe with time, if I start catching well, I might start just feeding by hand. And what I'm going to try and do is encourage the fish closer and closer into the margins as the session progresses. But at the moment I'm just fishing that line around about 4 foot deep. And really I'm just sort of making it up as I go along because I haven't done this kind of fishing for quite a long time. I'm really enjoying it. I've been experimenting with how I'm putting my rig in terms of which way I'm laying it, and also I've been slightly moving the rig and placing my rig a little bit further up the slope every so often just to see. But I just get the impression now that the F1s are just starting to come in and they're just starting to feed. They're not going mad yet, but it's early days really, so it's nice just to get a few fish going. I've been fishing for about 2 hours now, and that's my 9th F1, and it's just starting to sort of feed now, and I'll just pick that one up and show you. I suppose the biggest one I've had so far is about £4. That's another good chunky one. It's got to be £2. It's interesting that they start to feed at this time, and you've got to wonder, with it being 4 o'clock now, that perhaps this is the time that matches normally finish, and perhaps, you know, anglers throw in bait at the end of the session and the fish have become accustomed to moving into the margins and feeding. But I also think it's got to be due to the temperature as well, and perhaps as the light starts to fade a little bit, it's been a really bright afternoon, the fish start to come into the closer to the bank, you know, they're feeling less wary. But I'm really enjoying myself. I've probably had about 50-50 in terms of which line I'm catching on, and I'm just continuing the feeding pattern of topping up after a fish on one line and then switching over to the other line. So it always amazes me with F1s how finicky the bites can be. You've got to really dot your float down and keep a tight line between your tip and your float, and actually fish with a really short line between the pole tip and the float. I'm actually thinking on this rig I might shorten it even further, because obviously that just helps you connect quickly with a bite and achieve a really good presentation. Today we've only had a little light wind, and at the moment the wind's completely dropped, so it's really easy to fish and present the bait perfectly. And I've been experimenting with my shotting pattern, and I've set up 2 rigs that I'm catching on at the moment. One's a 0.2 of a gram, that's what I'm using at the moment, and the other's a 0.1, just to give me an option really. Obviously the lighter rig, the 0.1, I've shotted that with number 11 shot, and I've been fishing that with the shot more spread out to give a slower fall of bait. But just as I'm now starting to get more bites and more indications, I've switched back to the slightly heavier rig, and I've got a mini bulk of shot with 1 drop at the moment. But it's intriguing me. Obviously I don't really do this kind of fishing a lot, so I'm just experimenting by changing the shotting pattern, and also by changing the depth slightly. So nothing on that line. I'm going to top that one up and go back onto my right hand swim. At the moment I'm just feeding neat maggots, and I'm feeding a good potful every time. I'd asked John what the best baits were at the moment for the F1s, and he said it's definitely maggots that they seem to be preferring. I know some of the anglers are really successful in the matches fishing with casters as well at the moment, and with time the pellet will become more and more dominant, but maggot seems to be the most reliable bait at the moment, and the one that the F1s are really kind of homing in and feeding on. And I think that's the fascinating thing really with fishing in general, but certainly fishing on commercials, that throughout the year different baits and styles and methods will come into their own at different times. It's quite amazing really, and perhaps in a month or so when the weather warms up, the water temperature increases, then the fish will be caught on different baits like pellet and also up in the water. At the moment I'm catching all the fish on the bottom, so obviously I'll try shallowing up, and if the fish do come up I'll follow suit, but at the moment all the bites I'm getting are on the bottom. Well, I went back on the right hand swim and got a fish straight away. Seems to be slightly better at the moment. You can see it's almost just getting in a bit of shade under that tree, so that's developing into a better line. I think these F1s are absolutely beautiful. It's easy to see why in the matches they're getting such big weights with these F1s. They really are chunky fish. Look at that one. Well, I'm not sure if that's an F1 or a normal common carp. He fought differently to the F1s. He charged all over the place, so I think that one perhaps is a carp. It's not actually as big as the F1s. Definitely ramping up now. The fish are feeding really well, and I'm still feeding by pot on my right hand line, but on the left I'm just loose feeding now, and I'm feeding a bit closer in, so I'm going to feed that for probably another 10 minutes before I go on it, and hopefully I can start to catch on that line as well. But at the moment the fish definitely seem to like this shelter of this tree and these reeds, so it's just great fun now. I'm getting indications all the time and bites and catching really well, so it just shows you the fish have definitely started to feed as the sessions got on and we're getting into the evening. It's 5 o'clock now, so I'm going to try and have a good hour catching them. I've set 3 different rigs up, all on my match top 3s of my CP 2000 pole with the tip taken out. The elastic I'm using is silk, which is 8 to 12, which is the matrix elastic. Main line I'm using is 0.136 millimeter, so it's a good compromise really. I'm not fishing too heavy, fishing with a bit of finesse. I'm fishing with 0.125 millimetre hook lengths. Obviously I'm targeting F1s, not big carp. We're coming out of the winter and the fish have been a bit tricky, so I'm not fishing too heavy. The pattern of float I'm using, that's a homemade float. It's a 0.2 of a gram. I've set 3 of those up in the same pattern, and one with a 0.1, a bit lighter rig. I've shotted that up with number 10 shot, and for the most part on this rig I'm just fishing that as a spread bulk. I'll just show you the other 0.1, which I've shotted with 11 shot, and that gives me the facility of just spreading them out to give a nicer presentation, a slower fall of the bait. That worked quite well to start with when it was a bit harder, but now the more positive spread bolt rig is working best. I referenced it, but I'm using quite a short line there between the elastic and the float to obviously really help present the bait properly and also hit the bites from the F1s that can be a bit tricky at times. The other rig I've set up, I haven't really used it today, but I've set up another 0.2 float and I've gone with a heavier hook length, so that's 0.136 and a bigger hook, a size 16 hook. And I've stepped up to a 10 to 12 slick elastic on that one. So maybe towards the end of the session I'll give that a go. I mentioned the hook lengths. I'm using a 6-inch hook length, and the best today has been a size 18 B911 F1. So that's the rigs. Bait wise, I've focused on maggots, and I've used a mix of red and white maggots. One thing I did mention was I've added some ground pellets to just give a bit of attraction and smell, and I was using that to start with and it seemed to work. So the actual pellets I was using were these 4mm amino pellets from Evolved, and I've ground them up and just added them to the maggots. So that was a good trick. I think John mentioned it to me. And another thing to bear in mind was I did have a few micro pellets ready as well, just to help kickstart the swim, but to be honest I haven't really used them. I've just focused on the maggots. Colour wise, red maggots being best, but I have got some fluoro maggots as well, and I've been experimenting with them. So on the 18 hook, when I've been fishing double maggot, I've been hooking them through the tail like that. I've been mixing it up, trying red and white or red and fluoro, double fluoro, and I've also caught quite well on single. Right, let's get back in and try and catch another. I've just hooked this better fish. I don't know if it's a massive F1 or a carp. I'm seeing quite a few carp cruising around today and they've disappeared, so I wonder if they've moved in on the margins as well. I'm not really fishing heavy gear for carp, but I'm just taking my time and we'll see what it is. But it's getting pretty frantic now in the last sort of hour of the session. I'm just taking my time, see what it is. Oh, it's a decent carp, that is. He's just about got him in my net. Whee! It's a bit of a beast. Well, that's a bit of a lump, isn't it? Managed to get him out on that lighter gear and the puller kit really helped. Absolutely beautiful fish. Pretty heavy. I reckon he's got to be nudging 10 pound, that one, and I'm going to put him straight back. The pole cups I'm using today are from Frenzy, and I really like these. They're very, very lightweight, and you can pinch them on to your pole without damaging the pole at all. And I suppose I'm positioning my cup there around about 4 inches from the tip. I'm actually putting this little lid on. I modified it slightly. The lid came with holes in the top, but I've cut that. So it just means I can really cram that full of maggots if I need to. And because of the light weight, they don't tend to affect the action of the pole in any way. So they're really nice. Well, it's been quite fascinating working out the best way to play these F1s, and what I've kind of learnt is just to play them very, very gently. Obviously break down to top kit, and then I'm just shortening the elastic with my puller kit and hopefully bringing them up and netting them quite quickly like that one. If you miss it, then I found that they're really played up, so it pays to sort of take your time really and not rush them too quickly. And there's another absolute beautiful Packington F1. But it's coming towards the end of the session now and the light's just starting to fade, but the fish are feeding really well, so I'm going to try and catch a couple more. That's a big one, isn't it? Well, that's what we came for. Big, beautiful F1s like that. What a chunk. Absolutely splendid. Well, that's a lovely F1 to end on. Absolutely immaculate fish. Real chunks as well. And I've really thoroughly enjoyed catching these F1s this evening. Something I don't do very often, but I think I might do it a bit more. Especially on a beautiful spring evening like this. Absolutely fantastic. Well, I've fished for 4 hours this afternoon, going into the evening, and I've caught 24 of these absolutely beautiful Packington F1s. And also that big common carp as well. So I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. I've learned a hell of a lot. It's not something I do very often, but I've really, really enjoyed myself. I hope you have too. Thanks for watching.